Even before the pandemic, the popular narrative has decried the demise of brick-and-mortar stores, proclaiming that e-commerce was the new retail ruler. The shutting down of stores and other businesses drove e-commerce to new heights, but now that business and consumers are able to see a lifting, even if gradual, of health and safety restrictions, there's growing interest from both sides to balance offline and online activities. That includes retail. The reality is that for retail, as in many other sectors, we typically end up with a multi-channel landscape. The question is now, what will high streets look like as retail reopens? With so many store closures last year, many driven by retail bankruptcies, who will be the next generation of retail tenants? To find out, I sat down with Ariel Schuster, Vice Chairman of leading retail property consultants Newmark, to get an insider's view of what we can expect. Ariel represents many of the biggest retail brands and high-profile landlords and has masterfully negotiated leases in New York City and elsewhere, giving him unique insights into what's next for retail. In addition, he'll share his outlook for retail rental rates and why so many successful online brands are seeing physical stores as playing a critical role in growing their business. Before we get started, if you are looking for precise trend information that will define your next bestsellers, then Spin Expo is the place to go. It's the primary exhibition for yarns and knitwear. Spin Expo provides a well-edited selection of top-quality products that are filled with creativity, as well as trend information that cannot be found anywhere else. To learn more, go to spinexpo.com. That's spinexpo.com. You can also find a link in the show notes for this episode. Now, let's sit down with Ariel and get an insider's view on what's next for high street retail. Thanks so much for joining A Seat at the Table. We're really excited to have you on the podcast. I think right now the big question on everyone's minds is, what will real estate look like post-COVID? And it looks like post-COVID maybe, I don't want to say in the very near future, but in the somewhat near future.
Yeah, well, I'm sitting here in New York City in my office outside Grand Central, and I'm feeling very optimistic about the world, very different than I felt 90 days ago.
Oh, that's good. When you look at the media narrative, all you really see is people that are fleeing major cities in droves, right? The landscape shows boarded up retail stores and restaurants, vacant office buildings. People are talking about no one coming back to working in offices. And while some of that may be the case, at least for a while, what's your outlook being at the core of what's happening in real estate? Do you expect old tenants to migrate back? And if not, who's likely to be occupying the central business district space?
Well, I think it's difficult to talk in complete generalities. Right. What I'll say is the media does, and I wouldn't group them all together. I mean, I think, as an example, CNBC has one view on it. I'll say that the local media, the negative, the doomsday, the every store's closed, nobody's coming back, that sells newspapers, as opposed to there's a slight smaller turn, things are getting better, people are improving. So I do think that some newspapers are sensationalizing the situation. And listen, again, October, November, December in Manhattan was a very challenging time. I live in the Upper West Side. I come to the office every day, and things look bad, and things are improving. There's still, I think the stats are somewhere around 14% of the offices are occupied. We talked to our Newmark office brokers, and we're hearing different companies have different ways of looking at it. I think the vaccines, are completely underrated. I mean, these things are miracles, and the vaccine is allowing the world to come back. And I think as much as we're hearing about vaccines, it's not enough, because the reality is for my business, which is retail, that is what New York City has needed. And now as you're seeing the numbers grow, I mean, I think we're averaging 1.7 million in the last 7 days. We're closely monitoring that. The headwinds that we faced are being overcome. I'll tell you, while I don't do anything in residential, I'm just a pure retail person. Our building is filling up, my rental building on the Upper West Side. I speak to my big New York City landlords, and they're telling us that velocity is, in the last 30 days, has picked up. And undoubtedly, the residential return is going to be helped by the fact that the residential rents went down dramatically. And so people who may have not been able to afford New York are moving in. Offices, residential, tourism is something that New York is very much based
Right.
on. And listen, in 2019, there were 65 million tourists in New York. 51 were domestic, 51 million that is, which is almost 80%.
Right. Right.
And so that tourist comes back with cheap flights, cheap hotels. And so I don't want to make any assumptions, but I think a year from now, things are going to look much closer to 2019 than they do to now. So we're very optimistic. Retail rents have come down in some submarkets. They've stabilized. And I think there are certainly a lot of tenants that are now finally willing to commit, spend money, open new stores. We're seeing that. I mean, our personal book of business is definitely increased in the last 90 days. And I think logistically speaking, many of our retailers still can't come to New York because of the quarantining. So we're still waiting for that roadblock to be lifted when appropriate. And then our West Coast retailers, for example, they haven't flown in a year. So we need that change in order for people to come in and make big decisions, because when you sign a lease in New York City, typically the rents are high compared to the rest of the fleet. So New York is definitely, undoubtedly on the rebound in all asset classes.
In terms of retail, what are some of the bigger, what you would see as long-term or somewhat long-term shifts in retail?
So the shift I think that is most appropriately attributed to COVID is the continuing interaction between online and retail. I will say that all of these trends started way before COVID. So the trends that I think are the big ones, which are smaller stores, more interaction between online and retail, shorter lease terms, those all started before COVID. COVID just accelerated these things. The reality is that retail is no longer so. How you buy things is no longer in silos, meaning it's not just you go into a store and you buy something and that's one way of doing it, or you go online and you buy things online. That's really not how things work anymore. They're all interconnected, meaning how the shopping experience at the retail store is going to help drive the customer behavior online. How the online experience is going to impact how people shop in stores. And you're seeing more and more retailers. I'm just thinking about Target because they announced their earnings today. Target has been very thoughtful in their approach. As a consumer, you go into a Target store, you can pick up at the store, you can ship online. So they're all melding, and they're melding more and more than they did before. So I think that's the biggest trend.
So other than the more multi-channel approach, but how would that really impact the physical space that people would be taking up?
Well, it actually goes both ways. Some retailers are looking at it and saying, we're going to shrink our footprint because we can do more of the sales and more of the shipping online. I think Bonobos was one of the first retailers to do that, which is essentially they create these guide shops. Right. Our company helped with their rollout. And the customer experience, you go on, you can try on a size, but it's getting shipped to your house, which means you don't have to have the inventory. You don't have to have 32 shirts at a medium. And so that limited their square footage. On the flip side, you're seeing tenants like Whole Foods who are going bigger because they're actually doing fulfilling and deliveries out of their stores. So if you walk into a Whole Foods in Manhattan now, some of them have a good percentage of their sales floor dedicated to deliveries, which is not a customer in-store experience. So it varies depending on the sector, but it's caused people to rethink what the standard is.
So in terms of some of the people who are coming in to take up retail space, do you see more of it being driven by online brands that are starting to open up physical stores, or do you see more international foreign retailers coming in? Where do you see the new occupancy coming from?
I mean, international tenants are always coming to New York, and that's one of the pleasures of working in Manhattan, is because typically, with a few exceptions, perhaps Miami or LA, we're the first stop. So there are still a tremendous amount of international tenants that have not come to New York that will be coming in, and that will be a certain percentage of demand coming in. There is undoubtedly the wave of online retailers coming to stores is going to continue, and it's a very simple reason. 10 years ago, the cost of acquiring a customer, CAC, online was a number. And as the competition has increased, the cost of advertising and capturing these customers has continued to increase, meaning it is very expensive now to get a new customer online.
That's true, yeah.
It's crowded. Facebook, there's Instagram, there's 1,000 shirt people, there's 1,000 shoes people. So it's gotten really crowded, very different than it was when Warby Parker started doing what they did, which was a huge success. And so now, as rents have come down, which they have, now to have a store is most likely a much better use of these companies' money than another 13,000 blasts on Facebook that are getting diluted by the other 23,000 blasts from somebody else. So we are seeing that for sure. That's going to continue. I think landlords have to be careful because just because somebody sells things online doesn't mean they're going to have lasting power. And for Warby Parker, there's 20 failed Warby Parkers.
Right.
So we're very careful when we're advising our landlords to make sure that there's actually a staying power. There's barriers to entry, capitalized company. But yeah, I think that's going to be a big driver.
Do you think, touching upon what you just mentioned, are landlords being far more careful right now in terms of who they're taking on as tenants? And not just new guys, because we've seen a rash of bankruptcies from existing tenants and a lot of major players who've not paid rent during COVID. I mean, how do you see them handling that risk factor nowadays?
It's always been scrutinized. I mean, the better, smarter landlords have always been thoughtful in how they analyze retailers and have not let people in just for the highest rent. The ones who have held out for the last dollar and not cared about the credit or the ability of a tenant to survive the 10 or 15 years, those are the ones who are in trouble. So we've always had our landlords be very thoughtful about that. What I will say is I do two things. I represent landlords. I also represent retailers now are analyzing the landlords because the reality is in New York, there's been a lot of buildings trading in the last 10 years. And there are some landlords who are over-leveraged to the point where they can't actually make a market deal because their lenders are essentially in control of the decision. So when we tour a submarket, whether it be Soho or Madison Avenue, we need to analyze the building, analyze the capital structure, make sure that the debt isn't too high, that the landlord is unable or incapable of making a market deal. So it does slice both ways.
So if you're looking at retail rents, which is the other side of the equation, a lot of people have blamed astronomical rents for playing a key role in taking down retail, particularly during the pandemic, but even prior to the pandemic. It was a struggle. Now, part of it might have been that retailers had too many stores and they just couldn't handle that amount of properties. But a lot of it was rents in so many cities had gotten really high. Do you see that there's going to be downward pressure on rents for more than just the next couple of months?
Well, the rents in Manhattan had capped out in late 2016, early 17. So we've had rent decline or stabilization for 3 years now. And the reality is, I think a lot of the stories I've read about, and again in the papers, or leases that were done at the height of the market, meaning from 15 to 17, where rents were very different than they are today. And I think the challenge with retail, very different than hotels, for example, the challenge with retail is people are signing long-term leases. And so what may have looked okay in 2015, by 2020 was not sustainable. And certainly I think some retailers overextended. Several retailers expanded for the sake of expanding. And so that's a challenge. I mean, the mom and pop, again, I mentioned I live in the Upper West Side. As an Upper West Sider, it's very sad to see the local restaurants struggling. And rent is a huge component of their survivability. So it's a balance. I think a lot of landlords have been working with tenants for the last year, trying to get through this together. We have seen the spectrum from both. I mean, we've seen retailers draw a very hard line. We've seen tenants be hugely accommodative. We've seen landlords playing ball and deferring rents and debating rents. And we've seen some landlords take a different approach. So it does vary. And again, I hate to group tenants in one bucket and landlords in one bucket because different people have reacted differently over the past year.
Right. Now, there's been talk about new leasing models, not just in New York, but elsewhere in the country and elsewhere in the world, that had more flexibility built in, that had some kind of a factor in there, that part of it was fixed rent and part of it was dependent upon retail sales.
Yes, and that concept that hybrid model is very common in
Right,
malls.
right.
There's fixed rent with a percentage rent. New York City historically has not had a big percentage rent component. We are seeing it more than ever. It makes sense in a lot of cases where tenants have track records and you can actually figure out rationally a logical sales number. And some landlords are open to it. The challenge again goes back to something I talked about before, which I don't think is talked about enough, which is landlords is leverage, meaning lenders typically do not give credit to percentage rent. And so when you're doing deals, you have to make sure that the leverage is low enough that the base rent is sufficient for the lenders, because the reality is, even if a tenant does phenomenally well and hits the percentage rent and pays a lot in revenue, the lender really only focuses on the fixed rent.
Right.
So flexibility is definitely new, and again, I think that landlords who we work with or have been doing deals through COVID, who are active now, are ones to understand that the world's changed and it's changed in a more collaborative way. It used to be that a letter of intent was 3 pages, and it was really a very different, it's a landlord-tenant relationship, very, I don't know what the term is, linear. And now it's a lot more collaborative, it's a lot more sharing, it's a lot more getting in each other's business, and I think that's a good trend long term.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, because we see that playing out in so many other areas of business, and not just because of COVID, but probably accelerated because of COVID, which is this sense of much more collaboration. We're seeing that in the supply chain, for example, buyers and suppliers having to take a more collaborative point of view to say, how do we work together so it's a win for everybody, as opposed to looking at it, as a zero-sum game. And I think it's interesting to hear you touch upon that when you're talking about landlord versus tenant relationship. The idea is that it's better to help each other and have stable business than to try to be opportunistic, right, or transactional.
Absolutely.
In terms of rents, though, right now we were talking about the fact that rents are somewhat depressed, obviously, because of everything that's gone on in the past year. Are there opportunities for retailers who are bold and who are going to be a little more ambitious or aggressive right now to come in and sign some very advantageous leases?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the well-capitalized tenants with good balance sheets, this is a great time to be signing leases. If you think through the process of signing a retail lease, it takes a really long time. Meaning, if a tenant toured the market today, by the time you sign a lease, it's 3 to 4 months. By the time you open a store, it's another 4 to 6 months. So really, you're a year away from actually opening. And the reality is, March of 22, opening in New York City is a great time to open.
Right.
So our retailers are definitely expanding cautiously. The ones that can get into New York and tour. And from a landlord perspective, it's to get a tenant today that will be there for 10 years, is well capitalized, that has a business model that's going to succeed. It's also the right thing to do, is to lock them in. So it's a dance, as it always is, between landlords and tenants. But we are certainly seeing a lot more retailers that now that the vaccine is real and it's here, some of that fear of opening in New York has dissipated.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. But I think it's interesting that you're talking about a 10-year outlook, because probably 18 months ago, 10 years seemed like a realistic term to be looking at. And now, even 5 years, people feel a little bit nervous about trying to look forward 5 years and make some kind of a prediction.
Well, again, it varies on the company. I mentioned Target before. Target knows their business. They're committing to 15 plus years, and that's one side of the spectrum. Whole Foods will do 20-year leases, and they get it, and it's a solid. And then you have, we talked about before, about online retailers. Sometimes those founders are 23 years old, right. And to them, 10 years before, they're playing video games in their pajamas. So it's part of where a retailer is in their cycle. So
we focused primarily on Manhattan. Do you have insights that you're hearing about from your colleagues in other markets in the U.S., other key markets, of how that's comparing and contrasting to the scenario in Manhattan?
Yeah, absolutely. I focus in Manhattan, but I represent a lot of retailers throughout the country, so we do have those conversations a lot. We've heard, New York, Chicago, and San Francisco are grouped in this one bucket of really most hard-hit cities. You look at the suburbs, northern New Jersey as an example, Long Island. That market has not slowed down at all. The suburban shopping has held up. Rents have held up. It's hard to find space.
Interesting.
So it's very different. Yeah, northern New Jersey, like I mentioned, it's very difficult to find space. You look at Miami, it's like Miami is where everybody's fleeing to, so tremendous amount of demand from retailers out there. LA is very strong, especially in the luxury market. So some of our retailers are there, and they're realizing that other tenants have expanded and bought buildings, and it's tough to find space. So it does vary. I'm personally a lover of urban high streets. I think long term, I firmly believe that the cities are more important, and they will be. And I think that some malls will always be around, but I think that if a retailer looks at their fleet of stores, I think they're going to prioritize cities over malls. And so I think that trend's going to continue. And I think that Chicago will come back, San Francisco will come back, and that's my view of the country.
Okay, so those are the key markets from your point of view.
Well, Texas is a state that everybody talks about now. What's happening in Austin is incredible. Dallas is strong. Houston is strong. So, the country is huge and made up of a lot of submarkets.
Right.
Trend-wise, malls, again, some malls will always be there. They'll always be tremendous. But I think the majority of them will become less and less relevant.
Another thing that we're hearing a lot about is stores that are actually going as standalones in strip malls or even as what you might call roadside, trying to open up these smaller stores to address people who want that convenience, who are not near a downtown area and perhaps are even in a less congested part of the country than perhaps northern New Jersey.
Yeah, we've heard that. And listen, part of operating in a mall, it's expensive. You have common area charges, air conditioning, the hallways, and oftentimes that's not the right shopping atmosphere for a retailer. And to your point being, there's a great project in Long Island and Westbury outside the Roosevelt Field Mall. Roosevelt Field, this mall will always be there. It's a monster. It's a regional mall. Across the street, you have a great Trader Joe anchored center, which is always full. And so that kind of parking in, walking in, that is a better outcome and a better shopping experience for a lot of retailers who historically would have looked at that submarket and said, we have to be inside the mall. So it's a great example of what you're talking about, which is convenience and not being in a 2 million square foot mall.
And you're seeing growth in that as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So as someone sitting in the position you are, which is behind the scenes in the property market, from your point of view, what might other people either not be aware of or misunderstand?
Yeah, I think undoubtedly lack of information is prevalent. And we talked earlier about these articles talk about things that are very obvious in front. A store for rent sign, 3 of those in a row is obvious. What's not obvious maybe is that it's a development site or it's been leased. So, us in the trenches, and I will say that in my industry, urban retail is an opaque business in terms of information. Malls, sales are reported, it's very clear, information is readily available. New York City, information is hard to get. And that information is what creates good decisions. And so sales numbers, knowing what Sweetgreen's doing, Cava Grill's doing, and Panera was doing, that information is proprietary. It's great brokers have that. On the flip side, understanding debt structures, understanding whose loans coming up, great brokers have that. And there aren't that many great brokers who spent the last year in the office, working hard, keeping their head down, staying safe. And I think both retailers and landlords are realizing now that information, that willingness to work hard is more important than it ever was. So that therefore we're feeling very optimistic about our book of business, and there's going to be a flight to quality. There's going to be a flight to quality in all aspects in the world. Mediocrity is not going to be tolerated in any sector.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, because we're seeing that in so many categories, that oversupply of things that are mediocre. Now, all of a sudden, quality is the new luxury. It's the new status. And it's not necessarily one that's obvious. But with so much choice, yes, quality throughout is becoming increasingly important, particularly for those tenants in the case of real estate, the choice tenants. It's important for them to have good landlords, but for landlords also to have reliable tenants.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I am very bullish on New York City. I hope everybody is aggressively trying to get vaccinated, which I think is going to be the key to this. And I think if we have this follow-up podcast 6 months from now, I think we can talk about all the deals that we've seen that have been being worked on, and I think it'll be a very bright time in New York City.
Well, that's really good news. It's very encouraging for so many people that have really been struggling just to stay alive, whether they be landlords or brands or suppliers. I mean, the entire chain has, around the world, had a very tough time of it. So to hear that kind of an encouraging outlook, I think is a very good start to this year. And I definitely look forward to touching base with you in 6 months and hearing about all the new deals.
Absolutely. Then by then I'll have Skype figured out, so I'll be around time.
Ariel, thank you so much for taking the time. I think this is great.
Absolutely.
I think that our audience is going to find this very informative. So I thank you very much for taking your time.
Terrific. Thank you. It was great to speak with you.
If you enjoyed this episode of A Seat at the Table, join me each week when I sit down with leading executives and entrepreneurs who share their insights, experiences, and future vision for business. And make sure to visit Spin Expo. From trend information to technical innovation, Spin Expo is the primary exhibition for yarns and knitwear. The fair provides well-edited forums featuring high-quality products that are bursting with creativity. To learn more, go to spinexpo.com. That's spinexpo.com. You can also find a link in the show notes for this episode. And before you go, our Q1 Current Situation and Sourcing Executive Report is now available. You can find more information about this and other useful links in the show notes. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Jane Singer, and I'll see you in the next podcast episode.